Welcome back to It All Counts, the podcast where we can continue to learn and grow and get better together. It's been a fun ride. I'm excited about our guest today, Pastor David Hawkins. How you doing?
I'm excited to be here, Coach. So how are you?
I'm phenomenal, man. You're looking good. I like that shirt.
Hey, thank you, sir. Every now and then I get something good from the Goodwill.
I like that. How's life treating you?
Life is wonderful.
Pastor David Hawkins is actually my brother-in-law, and he's done a phenomenal job in the ministry. He's also from East St. Louis, Illinois. Pastor, tell me a little bit about East St. Louis.
Oh, man. Born in the jungle, man. It's our hometown, place that is near and dear to my heart. My dad and mom moved to East St. Louis in the late 40s. So we got history all the way back to the 40s, and it was a different city. And I've seen it transform over the last 40 years. So
40 years for the better?
No, 40 years, I have seen it go from what could be to what it is, which is a continual decline. And that breaks our heart. Breaks my heart, breaks our heart. Because, you grow up as a child, you want to see things improve, and you kind of come back. It's kind of why I feel assigned to the region is you want to come back to help and to do what you can to give other children and youth an opportunity.
Pastor, how did you get into ministry?
That's an interesting question. So it's a long story, but I'm going to shorten it. I never in my life anticipated being in ministry. It was never on my top 10 list, top 30 list. Actually, I was in high school a practical atheist, even though I was in a Christian home. A lot of church hurt, a lot of pain that I seen my father go through. And I never wanted to have any parts of that. But my father was stern. So even though we were in a Christian home, his rule was you don't have to be Christian, but you have to act Christian. Because again, first family, you know how that goes. They look at the pastor's children, if he's going to still be hired there, etc. So I learned to act like I was a Christian, but I was really that created a resentment of the church.
Brothers and sisters?
Yeah. So I'm the youngest of 12, 11 boys and 1 girl. So I'm the last of the Hawkins.
How was that experience being the last one?
It's varying experiences. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of resources. We struggled. So we had that struggle compounded by 12. And being the youngest, though, I did get a little bit more of a close relationship with my father. Because I'm 4 years separated from my closest brother in age, but my dad became my best friend. So whether it be practicing baseball, basketball, he was the one that was always with me.
Pastor, what would you say to a grandmother, a praying grandmother for years, who's on the brink of losing hope?
Yeah, that's a real personal question for a lot of reasons. And I wouldn't necessarily put it as just being a grandmother. I've seen my mom lose hope. When you're raising 12 kids, you see kids kind of make decisions and go paths that you didn't or you never expected and you're not proud of. I've seen her eyes water so heavy that she began to question God about why is this happening. And so I think for a grandmother that's losing hope, I would say that's not uncommon. I think we all in our faith journey lose hope at some point. We all get to a point where things are just not the way we want them to be. And that's a part of every journey. I would say to her, hold on, your prayers are not in vain. And oftentimes when I've lost hope or when I've lost a little bit of faith, I go back to what God did yesterday. And that yesterday is general. It could be 10 years ago, 5 months ago, that God is constantly showing me in my journey that I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you.
Pastor, in the black communities, and I'll be more specific, when a young man, Michael Brown, was murdered in Ferguson, Missouri, why don't the church community step up? Because for me, there's no color when something like that happens in a community. Why don't the churches come together? I've always found that strange that churches do not come together in situations like that.
Yeah, and I would say Michael Brown's situation was a unique one. One, it was worldwide. It got the eyes and the attention of the world. It was painful. it was a lot of backlash of what I'll call first reactions, emotions that were like, how dare this? How could this? And so a lot of stuff went unnoticed. As a matter of fact, a good friend of mine, Reverend Robert Scott of Central Baptist Church, along with Freddie Clark and a few others, actually got together and created a cohort of pastors, including myself. And what we were doing was not only on the actual grounds with and where Michael Brown was murdered, but we also were available to the community that was hurting in pain. But I think sometimes the pain outweighed a solution in that moment because our solutions was more process solutions versus immediate. And so the cameras were not interested in churches. The cameras were interested in the protests. So the protests got more attention than actual organizations that wanted to help, including churches. I'll never forget, I got called into a pastor meeting during the Ferguson riots. And when I walked into this room, with a bunch of law enforcement. And I'm talking high-level law enforcement. So you have to use your imagination there. I'm talking some of the highest levels of law enforcement that America provides. Wow. So it was that level. And their concern was, how can we partner with you all to mitigate the situation? And that led probably to a 3-hour meeting. It's not just mitigating the situation. Ferguson was no surprise to us who are African American. It was no surprise. It was literally a teapot that was whistling for a long time. And so when that happened, it was no shock that the community responded the way it responded. You know, places that you and I would drive to as children or as teenagers, and our parents or ourselves get pulled over for nothing. Yes. It was a police ran, and they focused on the poor of the community, kept them in the cycle of warrants for their arrest, violations, so they never could break the cycle, and that became a frustration. So when that happened, it was literally an explosion that had a lot of gunpowder to it. And we're talking 30, 40 years.
Pastor, I assume you being in the community, you're a pillar of the community. Anonymity is out the door for you nowadays. So when do you take the hat off where you're not a pastor anymore and I can just be me?
Man, that's hard to find and balance. That's a great question. Every pastor struggles with that, I'll tell you, because we are human, right? We're not born as a pastor. we might have an assignment and a purpose, but we're not born clergy. And so for me, I'm grateful to have a tribe of people I can be safe around. People who allow me to be David Hawkins, which is the name I was born with. And I'm finding that community has kept me away from what I'll call some catastrophic decisions. Because when you're always Superman, you never realize that ultimately you're going to wear thin. And there's some kryptonite around every corner. So I'm thankful for my tribe.
Pastor, what's the point? I'm saying a couple different things because I'm also asking questions for myself and my experience. So what's the point in me going to church? What do I gain from going to church as opposed to reading the Bible?
Yeah, that's important, right? That is a delineation. You should read your Bible. That's just your personal devotion to God. Church should not be the one that's responsible for all your Bible knowledge. You should have the individual responsibility to say, I'm going to own my discipleship. Church to me is like the gas station is to a car. It's the place I get to see other believers or people who are in the process and have questions. I get to see exactly how I can be a ministering agent to them as well as I get something from them. It's the reason why teams have cheerleaders, right? You know, you get some energy from that. And so for me, I find the community of faith to be inspiring. It's my place where I can be safe. I can seek after God together. And I see others who I know are going through a struggle. Like I got stories in my head right now, and I see that person come to church going through a major crisis, and they can worship. That gives me the strength to know that whatever I'm going through, I can also attend and be a part of that worship experience as well.
I like that, Pastor, and I'll give you an experience off that. I remember, and I won't say because I've been in a lot of different places, I won't say where, but I was with a fellowship group of men, and it was probably 8 to 10 men, and we would meet once a month, but it wasn't long. I would say maybe a couple months max. I just felt like there was some things I shared, and all of a sudden they trickled out and leaked out, and I never went back. So how do you expect me, if it's fellowship, whether it's men or women, whatever the fellowship is, married couples, however you want to do it, how do I trust this environment of these unknown people? Because again, we have corruption within the church.
Yeah. I think that all depends on the house. We at our church, which is Living the Word Church, we spent a lot of time being a healthy environment. In order to be healthy, there has to be transparency and vulnerability. You can't be indestructible. You can't be non-transparent and expect to be healthy, because I think we are made better when I can share my wounds and still be revered as a capable man, in my case or in your case. So for us, I think it depends on the house you're at. Is the leadership vulnerable? Are we talking transparency from the top all the way to the bottom, or are we just asking those who are followers to be transparent while leadership isn't being transparent? So when you create a culture of transparency, i.e. vulnerability, that, hey, today I don't feel it. And many times I've gone to the pulpit or the podium and time to preach, and I'll tell them, I'm not feeling it today. I want to be at home. I want to be on the golf course as well, like everybody else. I want to go to brunch, I want to know what that experience is at 9 or 10 a.m. Or 11 a.m. So we are not separate from the vulnerable experiences, or should I say the experiences that would require us to be vulnerable. So I try to model vulnerability. I model transparency. And then when it comes from the top down, it's okay. So I can't speak to every environment. We would love to say that just because you're church, you're good. That's not the case.
Now, Pastor, it seems like, and I know it goes on because we're all human. Even though you're pastor, you're still a human being first, and we all make mistakes, and it's safe to say we're all flawed. But it seems like the past couple of years you hear about a lot of bishops, pastors, ministers that I'm gonna say falling from grace, but I don't want to say that because we all make mistakes. But it seems like when they make one mistake, we throw them out the door. It's like, hold up, man, that he or she is human. So what do you say to your congregation if you make a mistake and fall?
So there is a certain level of responsibility on the leader that we have to count the cost. When we step into leadership, we don't get to play by the same rules as those that follow us. It's just a part of that reality. If my son goes outside and for example, breaks a window, we can say, hey, he was being a kid. I can't go outside and throw an intentional rock at a window of a neighbor's house and say, hey, he was being a kid. It's just different levels of responsibility. So we as leadership, as pastors, we know that. Right? We know that there's probably going to be a thin line of grace that we're given and a thin line of restoration. And so that's unfair to some, but I can tell you that, one, we need to be a little bit more open to grace and restoration. But as a leader, my responsibility is not to be perfect, but also not to be stupid. And I think that's the balance that keeps us safe. And it doesn't guarantee that something won't happen. But at least I'm not putting myself in position to be compromised.
Pastor, give me an experience of you being a father, but more importantly, a black father within your congregation and in your ministry. Does it help you, hurt you? And then you having children, are you worried about what they do?
Yeah, so I get the privilege of, I got a 14-year-old. And through marriage, I got a 32-year-old. So, which I treat him as a grown man, of course. But my son's responsibility for me as a father is something I take at a high level. I don't take it for granted. It's probably the greatest role that I actually carry beyond pastoring. God is not going to look at me and say, you were a great pastor, but he will look at me and see if I was a great father. And so what really motivates me to be intentional about my fatherhood, because my son is my heart, is my relationship with my dad. He literally is my number one mentor. When people say, what's the one person that shaped you for life and that you could say if you sat at the table, he was the one, it will be my dad. He was the man that poured into me vision and hope and direction. Without him, I wouldn't have the fortitude I have to this day. So because of that, and because of my relationship with him, I want to please, I want to please the paradigm that he set, the standard that he set. The other side of it is that I also saw ministry kill my dad. And I didn't really get to have the full exposure of my dad because of ministry. Because I think people don't understand that whatever church you're sitting in, whatever church you're part of, if that man has a family, that really is his first ministry.
Yes.
But the people want you, and especially in the Black church, they want you to be the plumber, the electrician, the roof installer, the medical expert, and the pastor, right? They want you to carry all these roles. They want you to be the communal, go fix it guy. And I intentionally speak against that. I intentionally sacrifice those sacred cows of perception.
Yes.
I will not be all things to you. I'm not called to be all things to you. And if it means that I have to sacrifice my son's quality time with his dad, then ministry is going to suffer, because I'm going to make an intentional statement and vocal statement that I'd rather be with my son. So I coach his basketball team, his middle school team. I made 3 days a week. I'm spending time taking him from practice, coaching other kids, making sure they're good. And I was tired afterwards, but it was my time with my son.
And Pastor, when you said about your dad, ministry killed him, meaning he was exhausted from long hours, or how the people treated him?
Both. So we had a terrible church experience. It's really a miracle I'm a minister.
And he was the pastor.
He was the pastor. Yeah, we had a terrible church experience. It has affected my siblings gravely to this day. I was 5 and 6 years old, so my brothers had a longer experience with the toxicity of that church environment than me. And so, but seeing how it impacted my dad had an impact on me, because for the first time, we were dismissed from a church that he had grown from 25 people to 300 people. And we're talking in the 70s and 80s.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a lot. And it was in the inner city of St. Louis. And it got messy. It got really messy. My dad was bivocational, but he never got a salary from the church. He never requested one. But we were the janitor. Our family was the janitor team. We were the roofing team. Anything that needed to be done on the grounds, we were cutting grass, taking care of the building. And to see how we were disposed of so easily because they wanted power. And so the ministry did something very pervasive to him. It was a deep wound. And so that, and then the actual work of ministry killed him. My dad died from a heart attack in his sleep. Yeah.
Were you at home?
I was. It was unexpected. That night, I actually was home from college. I was home for Christmas break, and we didn't have Bible study that night. I was now a minister. That's a whole story of transformation. Now I'm one of his ministers. God really, we say he captured our hearts, but I consider he imprisoned me. He set it up where it was like, you're going to pay attention to me, because I had different goals. I was getting out there, but I met God in college for the first time. All these years in church, I knew church, but I didn't know God. And so often I think people do the same thing. They mix up church with God, and those two are not necessarily the same. And so I knew church well, so I hated it, but I didn't know God. And so I'm at home for Christmas break, and I go to another friend's Bible study, and I'm a little upset because I'm like really ready to help my dad out. I'm ready to get in because that's kind of how he was, and that's how I am. Like, let's go for it. And it's kind of what we talked about. When I'm committed to something, it's 100%. And he said to me these words. He said, I came back home. He was in his rocking chair. He was big with this. He loved his rocking chair. He would rock back and forth and think and write on his scribble notes. And I said, Dad, you good? He said, yes. I'm talking to him on the edge of his bed. He's in the rocking chair. He said, God gave me a plan for the church. I was like, excellent. What's the plan? Because we were struggling. We were 24 people strong. We were struggling. And I said, share it with me. Let's go. Right? I'm ready to kind of take his notes and figure out what I can do. And he says, no, I'll share it with you in the morning. Well, he passed away that night. And so I was the one that walked into the room that morning and discovered by that time rigor mortis had set into him, his body. And that was hurtful. That was hurtful.
And Pastor, what do you say to a young man or a young lady who've never had a relationship with Christ, who never had a relationship with God, don't understand it? What are the benefits of it? Like, what's the point of me doing that?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest selling point for me, if I could use the word selling point, was irrefutably, undeniably, because I came into a relationship with God through Christ, I found my purpose.
Mm.
And I tried a lot of stuff. I think people need to understand that I was not a saint at all. I was wilding out in these streets, having a good time being a heathen. I had a professional degree in heathenism, man. If you wanted to party, call me. I was the party for you. And so I was experimenting with stuff. I was going this direction, but I was always good with school. And so my goal was to be a corporate lawyer. And I found no peace at it. I'm going through the courses or what have you in my undergrad to prepare for law school, and I hated it. It was like, wow. So then I went into education, and I'm like, let me try education. Maybe I can do something there. I didn't like it. And at the same time, I'm having conversation with God. And I get saved. I come to faith in my dorm room. So it wasn't at church that I came into faith or came into salvation. It was in my dorm room. I was literally calling out to God. And so, long story short, I prayed, show me my purpose. And I found it. And part of it was I was in business school. I finally got my niche. I said, man, business school is where it's at. So I got my undergrad in business. But it was a part of a bigger purpose. And I started ministering alongside my dad. I felt joy. I felt peace. So I'll tell anybody, the benefit number one for me was purpose. Then came this thing called peace and joy and fulfillment that I was looking for.
Now, Pastor, I hear everything you just said. I heard it all. But when I see, I'm going to say rappers, entertainers, they're very successful, making money, and they have incidents, situations, negative. They get involved with the police and all this stuff, but they're successful and they're making money. So I want to be that. So how do you explain to people that you have a right to heaven on earth, you have a right to that, but if they don't get it, you still can have eternal life with Christ? How do you get them to believe that? Because if I've been struggling for so long to make ends meet, my kids, and I've been paying my tithes, whether it's $5 here, I don't have any money, next time it's $2, but I see these other people, man, it's on the surface like they're living a great life. How do you explain that to them, that just be patient?
Yeah, I think that requires proximity, right? You can't yell that from the pulpit. You can't yell that from the podium. You have to really be in the lives of your youth and make sure that they see a plan, that it doesn't happen through a magical dove falling from heaven. It doesn't happen through happenstance per se, but it's a process, and everyone's trajectory is different. That no, you may not be a rapper, but you can be something amazing as an engineer or an architect or many goals, many things, electrician, a tradesman. There are ways to get to the ultimate goal of what we call self-fulfillment. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you start off with your basic survivalistic needs, and you go to self-actualization, which is the highest form of who you are, which is what we all after. And so we got to let people see there are different paths to self-actualization. Like, you don't have to be what you see on TV and videos or what you see promoted. Because sometimes I wonder, well, what's the incentive of those always promoting just the rappers in our community? That's got to be other professions like dentists and doctors and nurse practitioners, other paths to, having my heaven on earth. And I think that's where you get into relationship with our young people. And that's what we're intentional about with our ministry. We are elbow to elbow with them.
Pastor, as a leader in the community, how do you address social issues and challenges?
Yeah, so I think two things. One, the Black church in general has been the birthing ground of a lot of revolutions and acts of government, from civil rights movement, have all been birthed through the church. I would say that because times didn't necessarily press us to be that anymore, some of that went lacking. However, I think the church gets a black eye and a bad rap as not being as community involved as some would like, because they don't necessarily see it in the broadcast way. Like, we do a lot of work behind the scenes that we never broadcast because the people we're helping don't want to be broadcast. So we're coming alongside families, we're coming alongside single moms, we're coming alongside fathers, and we are giving them resources, and not just resources. In some cases, they need a check.
Yeah.
They need help. When you don't have groceries, you don't need prayer. You know, you need bread and peanut butter and meat and rice or something, right? And so it's a holistic approach. And I would say that for our church, we are adamant about being present. And we don't take on every issue, though. Our goal is not to be the answer of all problems in our community. Our goal is to do well with one problem and then build from that. And we are adamant about telling people, no, we're not going to answer every issue. But what we will do is raise an army of answers, which is our congregation. So how can that person over there and that person over there collaborate to then be an answer to a community issue?
I like that, Pastor. Now, to kind of piggyback off that, does the church or can they play a role in politics? Because what happens is in communities, the mayor, the local leaders, they all attend the church as well.
Yeah.
So that thing can get tricky here.
Yeah,
now.
it can. Man, listen. So I need to make a big delineation here. One, we are approaching a very heated political season in America. And the shamefulness of this political season is that I believe the Christian church has been co-opted, compromised by politics. And again, I'm not knocking politicians, but I'm talking about the science of governance. Someone asked me a long time ago, what's the definition of politics? Well, poly, if you break it down, means many. Tics, T-I-C-S, is bloodsuckers. So many bloodsuckers, right? Not the people, but the system of governance, right? So churches and people have to be very careful that if I'm going to be an influence to that political leader, whether it be a mayor, or whether it be a councilman or a councilwoman, I need to influence them on emulating the character of Christ. That's my role in their lives. Are you living according to the Sermon on the Mount? If I can get you to live the Sermon on the Mount, then you can reflect Jesus on earth. But what my job is to be that spiritual standard for them. Now, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to emulate that because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? I think the church's job is to continue to be salt and light and to call out truth to power. So for me, I'm like a bull in a glass factory. I don't necessarily give them the gentle answers. And no, I kind of come right at them. You know, I've spoken to enough mayors and I've called them out on their stuff to say, nah, man, that's not how we're going to get down with this. And if you want my support, these are the things that we're requesting as a community. So historically, we've never let a politician come in our church and have the stage. My goal is if you can't come to me when my community needs help, you can't come to me when you're running for office again.
Yeah.
And I stand on that to this day.
I like that. Pastor, what do you, how do you handle when you have wealthy people in and around the communities? And I see it all the time. I'm going to say East St. Louis, Baltimore, Detroit, Oakland, these communities that need help. But when you see some of these wealthy community people, they'll go do a function in Africa.
Yeah.
When it's like, hey, man, you just flew, you could have drove here 10 minutes.
You just flew 8,000 miles.
Yeah. So and again, it's their money. They have the right to that. But do you think they see it or just not aware, or is it a different kind of black? Yeah.
That is one of you want to get me going, get me on that topic. I've had so many. So first of all, let me just be clear. I think it's both and. I think we should do something in countries of need. Yes. I think we do. You know, our church as an African-American church, primarily we have a diverse congregation, but primarily African-American. We do help churches and orphanages and boys and girls homes in Zimbabwe, Zambia. So we're excited about that. But we also help down the street. So where I'm from, where you're from, East St. Louis is a mission field. That entire region is a mission field. So we're going to spend a lot of time in our own backyard. So I try to bring awareness to those who would be inspired to get a whole team of people to travel 8,985 miles to a country and take pictures and say, this is what we're doing. But you won't drive 10 minutes down the highway to the inner city and say, let me spread some of this goodness to there. So my job is a bridge. I'm a connector. I want to bring you the awareness. So my job then would be just not to be a connector, but to have access to that person to say, hey, have you thought about how to impact your own backyard? How have you thought about raising up indigenous leadership through your resources so that those who are from the soil that is negatively affected can be an answer to the soil? Because we're sons of the soil. So I didn't choose to be born in East St. Louis. If I would have had my choice, it would have been let me be born in the Rockefeller family in New York, right? Or in Malibu somewhere. But the truth of the matter is, I believe that where we're born, we're also to some degree assigned.
Yes, I believe it.
There's a burden there. There's a heartbeat there that we can answer. We can actually help the heart murmur of our communities, but we need to be resourced.
That feels good. That hit my soul. But Pastor, and this is tough because I oftentimes when I'm in my bed, I think about these things. I'll sit back and, not to say I'm bawling in tears, but I'll sit back, because as you know, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I just sit back now. It's like I'm here years later, and I thank God, but it's like, what if I was no longer here? So in your case, in ministry, you've been at bedsides of many people that didn't make it. How do you muster up the strength? Not like go and do an assignment like it's a job I'm getting paid to do, but how do you do that and consistently do that, and you keep doing it? How does that feel?
It never feels good. You don't want to see anyone suffer to the point of death. I don't have a right answer. It's every case is different. It is probably the most loathsome portion of my responsibility. Not because I don't like doing it. I don't like to be out of control. And in those moments, you don't have control. And so I've learned that sometimes it's not what I say in those moments. It's just being present. And so often, we lean on God and we lean on medicine. It's not either or. But I think sometimes the ministry of presence does more than the ministry of words.
So they need to feel your soul.
Yeah. They need to know they're not alone, because it's a lonely journey when you get a diagnosis for which you have no ability to really reconcile.
And Pastor, have you ever had anybody where they didn't have any family around?
Oh, yeah.
On their last days? On
their last days. I've done funerals where there was only a hearse. There was no cars following it. There was no family to...
What type of person is that, Pastor, where there's nobody?
Each case differs. But in this particular case that I can recall is that this gentleman had particularly burned every familial relationship he had. And he took for granted that people would always bounce back and be in his life. But when it came down to his last hour and minute of his life, no one, literally no one. And the funeral home asked me to do a favor. Would you please bury this gentleman for us? And so, it was a bad, sad situation. And I will tell you that I don't think anyone will be in that place. But at least in that regard, the funeral home saw fit to at least give him an honorable burial.
I'm prayerful that that's not me.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Pastor, I've listened to many of your sermons. I think you do a phenomenal job living the word. You're a tremendous teacher. You're entertaining, great energy.
Thank you.
You're in the trenches. They can feel your soul. They can see you. You're present. And one of your services, I took notes on this one. Don't let a thought that doesn't align with God stay in your mind. If God is for you, nothing can be against you.
Come on. Yes.
Now, Pastor, I wrote it down. I've got a lot of them, but I got that one. But I think that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Because again, that thoughts play in my mind all the time. So how do you have the discipline to not allow that thought to consume you?
Well, we're not just talking about any thought, though, right?
Yes.
We're talking about thoughts that won't go away.
Yes.
And typically it's the same thought, or it's about the same issue. And in those moments, that is God nagging your soul to say, I put that in you for a reason. Get up and do something with it. And so I've heard this said, you've heard it said, the richest place on earth is the graveyard because it's full of potential. So many ideas have died with people because they didn't have the courage or they didn't have the, I would say, the perception of access to move on it. And so, and in some cases, we wait for a perfect scenario. We wait for everything, all the things to line up to do something. And if you wait for everything to be perfect, you will be sitting down for the rest of your life. So for me, I'm talking about the singularity and the repetitiveness of one idea, one burden, one thing that literally scratches your soul that you cannot shake. In those moments, I'm saying, don't you dare let what's in your mind not be fulfilled, because the moment you make one step, you'll see God open the door. See, God never shows you everything. He says, as you walk, he will then reveal to you both the healing, the open door, the connections you need. God never gives us a full map. Mm-hmm. We would walk away if he gave us a full map.
That's true. Pastor, where would somebody start if I just met you for the first time and you say, how do I start? Because I can't say read the whole Bible. And how do I start just to get me started?
Man, that's a good question. I would say if you're just talking Bible only, I would say start with the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Just start there. Just read that.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's where you start.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting place because it gives you the central figure of the entire Bible, Jesus Christ. You get to see how he walked, how he lived, how he responded to people in need. And then you start realizing a lot of what we learned about church ain't Jesus. That if we really follow the words of Jesus, we can impact the world.
Yes.
But so often we follow our culture over our Christ, right? And so that's the first place. The second place I would tell people is get in the community of faith, like join a church or be a part of a church or a tribe where you can really learn from, because you can't do this alone. Like this thing here is a battlefield. This is not a cruise ship. Yes. So you're not going to wake up and have volleyball and swimming and 3-on-3 tournaments on the boat. Right? This is going to be warfare, right? And you need a community. The Bible says something about two are better than one, because when one falls, the other one can pick them up. But then it says, woe to him who is alone. So I would tell anybody, don't do this alone.
Pastor, this has been great. I have one other question for you. I feel like you'd be a great candidate for this question.
Okay.
If there was one thing in the world that you can change, what would it be?
One thing. Can I give you 10? No.
Just take your time, because I caught you off guard.
Yeah. I would say if it was one thing I could change, it would be racism. I think it's the most evil form of humanity in the world. And it's so easy for us to get in our pockets because we'd rather be separate than integrated, because distance demonizes. As long as I never get to know you, I will always have these perceptions of you that aren't true. I think racism has caused, humanity to miss out on solutions, miss out on how to solve poverty and food shortages, because we have these pockets that we'd rather be safe in versus be what I consider to be the original idea of God, was for mankind and humanity to work together.
That's a great answer, but I'm going to piggyback off that one. I had Dr. Leonard Moore on the podcast. I think it might have been episode 17. Did a phenomenal job. He's a professor at the University of Texas. Phenomenal job.
Yeah.
He said he feel like the churches should start teaching some level of Black history within the church. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so I think that is true. So let me tell you a philosophy that will work for churches, because the burdens that place on the churches don't oftentimes match the resources of the church.
Okay.
Because there has been an attack on history, particularly Black history, there have been people who actually have already created channels where they're teaching history now, so that we can circumvent the educational system and still get that information. I think for churches that might already be overtaxed with not having the volunteers, not having the means to get that done, is to look for those systems and those resources that are already being done and just simply point the people that way. Unfortunately, this is our new reality. But just because someone says you cannot or we will not teach something doesn't make it illegal. So we find a way around it, which is what we've done historically anyway.
It all counts, family. We've had a wonderful day. My brother-in-law, Pastor David Hawkins, who does a tremendous job living the Word Church. Great energy in that church. I feel it. I feel it in my soul, and not just because he's here. But let's continue to learn, grow, and get better together. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. It all counts, family. Take care.